Hi, and welcome to the Changes Ahead podcast.
Giving space to the often unheard questions,
Doubts,
hopes,
and challenges facing the church in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm Stephen.
And I'm Kathy, and we invite you to join us as we imagine the changes ahead. What struck me about the conversation with Brook is that it took a crisis of faith to actually expand his faith. And I just find that really fascinating and actually encouraging.
And you talked about expansion there. He uses this amazing image. I'm not going to spoil it, but as he was describing going from one place to another, I almost felt what he was describing as he expanded the way he looked at things. So have a listen to the story of expansion.
Brook, it's great to have you here today, and we are doing this interview face-to-face, and just want to welcome you to the Changes Ahead podcast.
Thanks. It's cool to be here.
And we're really looking forward just to hearing the perspective that you bring. And so maybe we'll just launch straight in and say, tell us a little bit about who is Brook?
Yeah, so I'm Brook Warner. I've been a West Aucklander my entire life. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Good thing.
Yeah. And I'm now a father of 3 children who are almost 7, almost 5, and almost 3. So that's kept me very busy for the last 7 years.
Yeah.
And feels like a whirlwind in a window that kind of, or like a journey that you jump into and then you're just starting to emerge now and going, oh, life's still here. So I have a background in science, but since finishing university, I've worked in the technology software space, and I'm really interested in big problems that the world, humanity is facing, and I want to work for places and use my skills to try and make a difference for those kind of things.
Wow.
So yeah, I've done a few different things over the last few years.
And maybe you could fill us in a little bit about, just growing up, what your early childhood experiences were.
Yeah. So born in a Christian home and the oldest of 4 children, and our life was going to church. It was a very Christian upbringing.
Yeah.
For the bulk of a lot of my childhood, we were homeschooled as well, and so we hung out with a lot of homeschooled Christian families. And I think socially, politically, theologically, my parents were pretty middle of the road, probably more on the slightly conservative side than not standard kind of Baptist conservative. And I inherited a lot of that.
So going from that context of growing up in a church family and in that homeschooling space to then head into a science degree, that must have been a bit of a journey and kind of encountering some new ideas or some ideas that perhaps pushed against some of the ways that you had been thinking. Can you tell us a little bit about what led you there and what that was like? Yeah,
so in 6th form, year 12, I had a really awesome teacher who went above and beyond the science curriculum, and he, rather than just teaching us what was in the curriculum, he would go and get journal articles from the latest stuff that had just been published and bring that to class, and would talk about that. And so he was helping us see that there was more than just some kind of very old dry material that had been around for 20 years and going, this is fresh, and here's the frontiers of science. And that really captivated me.
Wow.
That was about the time as well when genetic engineering and all that kind of stuff was just becoming a thing. And I found that super, super interesting. And so the whole idea of biotechnology and so I jumped into the undergrad and what eventually turned into biomedical science. And then after that, did a master's as well. So that's what led me there. And what was it like? So I had come from a background where we, for very good reasons, my parents were they were very, what's the right word? They were concerned, I think, that if you believed in evolution, you could have your whole faith shipwrecked.
Mm.
And so
Yeah.
my dad got a subscription to the Creation magazine, and it came to our house every month or whatever, and I'd read that, and I loved it, right? I mean, it fit with my natural love of science, and it fit with, you know, not wanting to necessarily like rock the boat in my family too much and that kind of thing, and be a good son. So it was fine, and I had no reason to question it. It was also reinforced by a lot of stuff that we were taught at youth group, various visiting speakers and that kind of thing, who would poke holes in evolution, so to speak, and yeah, build up, even if it wasn't explicit, build up this kind of implicit war between faith and science, and that the Bible and science are incompatible, or church and science is incompatible. And you know, they might not have always been intentionally trying to do that, but that was what a lot of people took away from it.
Yep.
So that was I guess the background that I took going into university, and then of course you meet that fully head on. And I had some lecturers who were very almost the opposite, like basically preaching evolution, probably more than I would say was warranted, but maybe they're doing it for effect, for like first years to kind of
shock you.
Yeah, a little bit. I don't know. I mean, I guess they've got all these people coming from all sorts of schools and places, and they trying to set a tone or something. But yeah, and then that, I mean, in that context, there is no debate about evolution as a theory or a fact, or whether you believe in it. Like that, it's just taken as this is something that science has agreed, and we move on. And we're now going to talk about the actual lesson, right? So if you want to go back to that, it's like a big kind of backwater, and it's not something that is on the mainstream of discussion at university.
And did that create conflict within yourself in that journey, or how did you experience that?
Yeah, there was a lot of cognitive dissonance, especially in that first year. I remember going to some of those visiting speakers that I mentioned and seeing if they could help me like relieve the cognitive dissonance. And like looking back now, I guess they must have, because I either just moved past it or just was like, well, we'll just agree to disagree, because the bulk of the university lectures were not on that topic, right? Like we're talking about stuff that was a lot more current and not millions of years ago. I guess another thing that it, and this is not necessarily cognitive dissonance, but I remember like I did a paper on embryology, which was really interesting. And like, that's a phenomenal topic, just understanding how a human embryo forms. And I think I was constantly amazed throughout my degree of like this is amazing stuff, right?
Yeah.
And what I would do is be like, and so, you know, therefore God is incredible, which is not necessarily wrong, right? But that was kind of how
are you able to sit with it?
How's it? Yeah, exactly. And that's not something that you would put in an essay, but you know, that's kind of how I interpreted a lot of what I was learning about. So yeah, the cognitive dissonance was kind of there, but I kind of moved past it and just really focused on like the here and now, really, because it kind of made no difference really to the science part of what I was learning. In terms of my faith, I think there was definitely some challenges there, but I don't know if I could fully articulate them all at the time. And it wasn't until a bit later that it started to kind of come out, as I started to grapple with like a depth in the science world, and at least what was to me a shallowness in my faith and in the church world that I was in. And that kind of disparity between the two was when stuff started to cause me a lot of questions.
I'm really interested in the depth that you found in the scientific study. And you mentioned you went on to do some postgrad study, a master's in that field. So could you tell us a little bit about your master's study?
Yeah. So over the course of my undergrad, I was really interested in kind of actually what started the whole thing, what I mentioned at the start with my sixth form teacher about genetic engineering and like solving big world problems, biotechnology. So I followed a path that was around virology, immunology, and genetics. And that was based on this idea that you could use, and we do this now, I say that grandiosely, science does that now, where you can use viruses to edit the genome of a particular organism, right? And so that could be used for really good therapeutic things.
So with that background, with what we've been through in the last few years, I wonder how has that impacted you and your observation of what we've been through?
Yeah.
A big topic, obviously.
A very big topic. It's made me realize unfortunately, how illiterate most of what would appear to be the Western world is on just scientific thinking. And I don't necessarily mean you need to know the ins and outs of viruses or how your immune system works, but just the scientific method and just science in general. And yeah, I'm basing that on a lot of social media stuff, but stuff I've seen just in the general media, but also conversations that I've had with people where, yeah, they just have their understanding is very thin. And I'm like, I was taught this at school, and I don't think my school was that exceptional. So I'm like, is it just that people have forgotten, or were they not taught it, or like, yeah, I don't know. But I had a little soapbox for a while where I talk about science is not a religion. Science is not an institution. It's literally like it's the empirical method, right? It's just a way of doing stuff. And this is what all of our advances in the last, let's say, 200 years are based on, right? Like we wouldn't be here without this empirical method. And yeah, it can be co-opted. Of course it can. Humans co-opt anything, right? But I think that people are conflating a lot of things when they get into some of these like either conspiracy theories or just this idea that science is corrupted and untrustworthy, or has been undermined by capitalist interests. Like, sure, there are places where that's definitely happening, but that doesn't mean that it's happening everywhere.
And I guess when there's a perspective in church or in the Christian world where we have to read the Bible a particular way, and particularly when it comes to, I suppose, the early chapters of Genesis, that will feed into that within the church or the religious space, I'm guessing.
Yeah, and I'd almost say not just Genesis, but Revelation as well.
Right. Yeah.
And so this is, another thought I've had a little while ago was that I saw a post or an article, I guess you'd call it, somewhere between the two, a piece of writing on the BBC website a couple of weeks ago, where they were outlining this giant PR exercise that happened in I think it was about the 70s or 80s, from like the oil, automobile, and mining industry kind of coming together. And they basically realized that our industries are not doing the planet a good thing right now. And there's a whole lot of data starting to come out that we're actually affecting the climate, and there's there's some negative effects. And so they hired a PR firm, but led by this one guy who had basically had a track record of taking on causes and clients that needed to really publicly change their image. So he'd done stuff with pesticide use. He'd done stuff with, I forget what it was now, basically stuff that was causing giant pollution in the world, and managed to sway public opinion that it wasn't actually that bad. And so they co-opted him, and he mounted this giant campaign to basically get out the message that the science is not settled. And it was huge. They were paying journalists to write articles, and they were doing all sorts of stuff.
Wow.
And you see the effects of that today, right? Not just the fact that we've done hardly anything about climate change, but also that you see that we are we don't trust science, basically, right? It's been undermined. And reading this post, a lot of people saying that they were campaigning on scientific issues and stuff, but it was they just keep getting met with this brick wall of but your science is corrupt, or your science isn't settled, or whatever. So there was that. And then to kind of make a really good left hook, right hook, the church has this theology that, and at least this is what I was brought up with, that it's all going to burn anyway. Right. So why does it matter, right?
We're all going to get taken out of it, so we don't need to look after the earth.
Yeah, and so you've got this kind of terrible mix, right, of like society as a whole is kind of undermining science. The church is undermining science for two reasons. One, because of evolution, and two, because of like the eschatology, that we don't really need to care about it. And that I mean, there's even more reasons, right? Like we have dominion over the earth, and that we're the pinnacle, and we should subject the earth, and like a lot of this kind of language, right, that I was brought up with. And so you end up in the situation where people's view of science is fairly compromised, I guess.
Sounds very
And
flawed.
suspicious.
Yeah, that's a good word.
And you used a great word earlier when you said we're at war. The science and church is at war.
Yeah, and I definitely felt that in a lot in youth group, and like I mean, there's still interactions I have today with particular people where that definitely is like that's the posture that they bring to that kind of thing, is that science is here to attack your faith, and it's wrong, not like as a whole, but just that it's flawed, or it's they've got their wires crossed, kind of thing. Yeah.
And how have you, I suppose, managed to sit with that and it not be a war? It's not that now, or it doesn't, at least now it seems to not be something that you're sitting with going, oh, how do these be reconciled? You seem to be sitting quite comfortably. How has that?
So I don't know how comfortably I'm sitting. I'm maybe more comfortably, but because I think I wouldn't call it a war, but I would say there's still elements that I don't fully have the answers to.
Sure.
But that's also, I'm probably more comfortable with that now because I'm just older than I was back then. I think what actually helped, and it might sound a little ironic, but what helped me come to terms with that whole thing was having a crisis of faith and going to Bible college. And ironically, I think I became more okay with, accepting science and what it had discovered, and specifically evolution. I think that's one that, for whatever reason, has become a big topic in Christian circles. I became more okay with just being like, at Bible college than I was at secular university. So that was a bit of a ironic kind of discovery for me, but yeah.
So maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that. What in particular were you learning that enabled you to sit a bit more comfortably?
Yeah, so I went to Bible college because, I went initially because my wife was going. I had nothing else to do, and it was a night class. So
that's a good reason.
Yeah, so I just went along and sat in, and it was a bit of a gateway drug for me to realize that, I think I mentioned before, like I was experiencing this like shallowness in my faith, and specifically in the answers that I could get in the Christian circles that I was in. So that's, like youth group leaders, church leaders, even my parents and my family, they did their best, but they didn't have anything more than I had, so they couldn't really pass a lot on than they already had. And I was kind of, I hit this, I guess the word is crisis of faith, but just going, if this is all there is, then I'm not into this, right?
Yes.
Like this feels as flimsy as something you tell a 6-year-old. Like there's got to be more to it than this, otherwise this is a giant joke, right? So that was like the phase I was in, and I was going through some pretty big doubts and kind of hadn't really resolved them, but kind of ignored them, and ended up along at Bible college with my wife. And I had a pretty bad preconceived idea of what Bible college was going to be, and so that just blew that completely out of the water. And discovered, like in those first 2 or 3 sessions of I was like, wow, I've been swimming in a frying pan for like the last 18 years, and now I've like finally discovered the ocean.
Wow.
So that was huge, and like I credit that to why I'd still call myself a Christian today. Albeit come a long way since then as well, but because I discovered that depth, and by depth I don't just mean that there were answers that, like, lecturers who knew stuff that I could talk to, but there's writings from thousands of years ago that I'd never heard about, right? Like people like Athanasius and there's others I can't remember right now, but how did I not know about this? And I discovered this whole world of like academia and depth of understanding of faith that was broad and diverse and colorful, and there were lots of perspectives and opinions, and it wasn't just the one way that the pastor said, and it was like, yeah, it blew my mind. So there was that, and along with that, and I think a huge part of what I found really helpful was what people call hermeneutics, right? But just like understanding that the Bible is not just one book that was written in one way, but it's like a collection of books written over thousands of years by hundreds, maybe thousands of different people, like all of this stuff, right, that you learn at Bible college. And I can't remember exactly, but I think even one lecturer said, and so therefore, like, what does that mean for the first 7 chapters of Genesis? That evolution at this point it's not a question of how, it's a question of who, which is a nice little pithy phrase, but like it worked for me because I was like, oh, well, then I don't actually need to worry anymore, right? Like, if I can be convinced or like convicted that God created the earth, kind of doesn't matter how he did it, right? Like, to me at that point, I can see why it can matter to some people. And then as I've gone along that journey, I've been like, evolution, like, it seems like an easy pairing to me, right? It still leaves a lot of questions. There's still a bunch I don't fully understand. But I think something that I've been reflecting on a bit recently as well is that probably a combination of like a scientific training or like an undergraduate, at least scientific training, combined with this kind of upbringing where the answers are all like it's all solved. The answer is God, kind of thing. There are always answers, and lack of and uncertainty being not a good thing. I actually had a lot of my sense of awe taken away, right? And as I've wrestled with like, maybe God's not quite the God I thought he was, or maybe I think evolution is true. What does this mean for like all these things that I've taken kind of for granted over my life, and the sense of awe that you like, if you, maybe another way to say it is, if you decided just for a day to say, no, God's not real, how would you then approach a bunch of scientific things? And sometimes there's a lot more awe that you get through that, because you're like, how the heck did this happen? And you think about astronomy or molecular biology or all of these things, and it kind of blows your mind. So sometimes I wonder if we actually cheat ourselves by going, oh, God did it, easy, move on, kind of thing. And it's like, wow, you're sapping that with like the depth of complexity that's actually there. So
you take away the curiosity, because we've been just given the answers. And someone else has done all the work for us. And I think that's a great word, that we've maybe cheated ourselves out of that curiosity and exploring, so that we wrestle with it.
So that was a bit of a realization for me, and I was like, man, this is what all my colleagues have been like. No wonder they're like having their minds blown and going on these lectures, because it's like, how on earth did this happen? And I'm just like, oh, God did it. So,
Yeah.
Wow.
And it sounds like you were able to bring a different set of questions to the text.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, what we were taught at Bible college, right? Was like, what questions are you bringing to the text, and what questions were the original like audience bringing, or what was the original author trying to answer, and was it whether like it was actually 7 days and all that kind of stuff. And then I guess things that added to that as well was doing more study in Genesis and learning about there's all these other creation narratives and epics like Gilgamesh and all this kind of stuff, and just being like, okay, so this is probably there's a lot more to this that I've not been told or taught, and how, like, it shapes your what changes your thinking on that topic, right?
And what's that like when you go, how come I haven't heard this before? Or how come, you talked about swimming in that depth of ocean. Yeah, what's that like?
Yeah, so I mean, I became an evangelist to the church for depth, right?
Wow.
And I had a real passion for it. I don't know if I did it very well, because I would also get frustrated. I'm like, why are we so fixated on like some little tiny frying pan over here when there's a whole ocean over there, guys? Come swim, like, but for all sorts of reasons, probably some of them my own method of communication, it wasn't always received. But I just wanted people to know that there was this depth over there, guys, and you don't have to splash around on this shallowness. So that was the main one. And at that point, it actually, for a while at least, my passion kind of went just purely to theological depth. It wasn't directed so much at like a science thing. I did some paper, I did a bioethics paper that was interesting, and like toyed with the idea of being a bioethicist for a while. There's not many of those in New Zealand though, so it's not a particularly secure career path.
So the experience of wonder that you were kind of evangelizing, that you were talking about, I imagine that has kind of sparked a number of passions for you in going forward and where you're perhaps sitting today. So could you talk a little bit about where your heart is really being drawn from all these experiences now and as you continue into the future?
Yeah, so I think a part of the story that I didn't mention before was when I was going through my science degree, I was still pretty center/conservative politically, and even quite, in some ways, quite like anti-environment. I remember we did an ethics class, or the church I was at put on like these evening workshops about ethics, and one of them we had someone come along and talk about like how to be more sustainable, and it embarrasses me to say that I basically sat down the back and mocked her pretty much the entire time. And it was a very immature time in my life. But around 2008, I was with some classmates at university, and there was a guy there that was kind of tangentially connected. I was studying with his partner, and so I come across him every now and then, but I spent more time with her. She was like in the classes. But one night we were having an election party. This was when John Key got in and Helen Clark went out.
Yeah.
And we turned off the TV at the end of it, and I was pretty happy. And he was not. And we got into a debate about this whole kind of left-right politics thing. Which, I mean, that's a whole separate topic. But the thing that stuck with me was that I think the issue at the time was like the smacking bill, or the anti-smacking bill, whatever it's called. And he had a couple of phrases that stuck with me. And one of them was like, as a Christian, he knew that I was Christian. How can you not be supporting something that is intended to reduce harm? And, I just debated with him and couldn't let him take that point. But it kind of really got into my head. And I was like, hang on, like, I have these beliefs, I have these views. How does that change or translate politically? And there's a lot of really compelling arguments for like why we should be looking after the planet. And then you bring into this like sense of God's created this planet, the awe, the wonder, and me developing a hermeneutic both with Genesis and Revelation, like I mentioned before, that actually maybe this isn't all gonna burn, right? And there's the oft quoted passage about how God says he's going to make all things new. And I did a lot of reading with N.T. Wright and a whole bunch of reading really around that whole topic, and was like, hang on, stop. Why is this not a big deal, right? Like, there's this whole thing about climate change. There's this whole thing about how there's pollution and the way we're treating the planet. And it's just so silent, like the church. I just never heard about it, ever. And I was like, there's something wrong here, right? Like we've missed something. And so then I went on this bit of journey to try and understand that. And kind of to that point, I guess I made before, that I think we just adopted this theology that it didn't matter. And so therefore we were like, oh, well. And maybe, I guess, just speculating here, because we have a distrust of science.
Yeah.
We were like, well,
It's not real.
It's not real, right? And that irked me.
And so it sounds to me like the passion has grown and is for climate change work. And I guess, you've just named the fact that it's not really something that the church talks about a lot. Perhaps that's changing a little bit these days. But yes, if we imagine the changes ahead for the church, what would you love to be seeing or being a part of as we imagine that?
Yeah, so I think in my mind, I want to know why the church is not at the forefront of that movement, right?
Christian.
Like, why is it that we have to rely on Greenpeace and Project Jonah and Generation Zero and hundreds of organizations around New Zealand that are out there doing the hard mahi to help, both in terms of changing public awareness, all of the work they do on all sorts of different fronts. And why is the church not involved? Why are they not advocating for this stuff? Why are we not putting our time, our money, our resource, our effort into it? And then why do we continue to do things that are actually damaging the planet, right? Like, I think we're, at least with my experiences, and maybe things have changed recently, but like there's a lot of fairly aggressive practices in churches that are having a massive impact on the planet. And sure, they might not be like as catastrophic as fracking or an oil leak, but there's also the sense that we need to be a witness for what we see as the way ahead, and I just don't think we are.
So what would that look like, do you reckon?
So I think one would be way more advocacy and talking about this issue, right? Like, one of the big frustrations for me is that it seems that the church is at the moment more interested in who marries who than the ongoing survival of our species and our planet. And I'm kind of wondering if we've got our priorities a little mixed up there. I don't know about you, but I would like my kids to have a planet, and I would like their kids to have a planet. And I sometimes wonder if we're taking this seriously. I learned about a phrase a while ago called the bike shed problem, where because there's this giant problem you don't want to talk about, we're just going to talk about like what color we should paint the bike shed, because it's an easy way to distract ourselves. And I wonder if that's partly what's going on as well, that let's just distract ourselves with something that we can control, because climate change is a huge problem. But the church is also a very large organization, right? If you think about it with a global lens, it could be doing a lot, right?
And I was thinking too, there's a lot of young people asking the same question. And I think they might have a bit more respect for the church if we were putting ourselves out more on the front line.
And also then taking a good look at practices with each person in the church. What are they doing in their own lives to reduce their carbon footprint? What are they doing to encourage, to change public perception and educate the public on things that could be done, or ways to reduce the impact on the earth? Getting involved with local groups that are trying to do stuff in this field. There's a lot of stuff there. And then collectively we should look at practices that we have around just the way we do church. Are these helping our carbon footprint or our impact on the earth, or are they not? Possibly a trivial example, but maybe it kind of illustrates the point. Like, I remember going to a youth group thing once in a barbecue or something, 100 plastic plates. And I'm like, this could have easily been some compostable plates, right? Like, that's not a hard decision. That's a choice that just wasn't made, right? And maybe it also includes thinking that frugality is not that pious when it comes to the cost of the earth. That's one that I came across a lot, was that it's going to cost too much to do that. And that, well, you haven't factored any externalized costs there about how much we're going to pay to clean up that pollution, both right now and also your grandkids. So I guess the other one that I find is that there's still a societal pushback. Like, there's a lot of people who are trying to make good change, especially people of kind of younger generations, and who are way more accepting of this. But there's still a lot of people in society who don't want to change, regardless of whether they're from the church or not. The church could be doing a lot there to help change those people's perceptions, right? And it's not just about like, is climate change real? But that's about all these things, all these little initiatives that are going on that are actually going to make a small difference, but together they'll make a big difference, right?
So you mean even like a church getting on board with a local incentive and volunteering their time? I mean, that's something that they could do. And so you find out that information, and
Yeah. So like, I mean, we've done one, just me and my wife, where we did a local planting day, but that easily could have been church. We did one with a home group that I went to for a while, where we did a weeding. We helped with the local school with some weeding around in their like native bush around the back of their school, because it was causing issues with the waterways. But I mean, one that I'm also quite passionate about is we have a massive over reliance on cars, or like single occupancy vehicles, especially in Auckland. We have a really bad problem with it. And we're regularly told, oh, yeah, our public transport's rubbish, and, therefore we're just going to keep using cars. I'm like, well, the only reason it's rubbish is because we haven't prioritized fixing it. And we won't prioritize fixing it because people keep complaining about it, right? And there's plenty that, if people were interested in actually fixing this, because maybe it fits with your theology that we probably should look after what God created, there's plenty of places to get involved to help change that public discourse. And I guess I'm of the opinion that we keep hitting into these brick walls because the general public are still really resistant to change, and we're gonna have to change, right? We can't keep going the way we're going, and there's a lot of people out there trying to change that discourse and that perception. And I guess I'm asking, which side is the church on, right? Are they helping it, or are they just making it worse?
So what do you reckon, if there's people listening who are a part of their churches, what can they do this week? What's one little step they could take that is actually going to help to shift the trajectory there?
Yeah, so a little step, I mean, I guess little is different for everyone, but if you regularly consume information via some form of social media, find something there that can help you learn more about this space. So there's a really good Facebook group that I belong to called Answers in Climate Science. It's a whole bunch of climatologists, is that the right word? Climate scientists, and people who are not, like me, just kind of going along for the ride, but lots of really good research and articles and information, right? And if you're scrolling Facebook to see what your mates are up to, and then you also see this, it's a good way to inform yourself, right? Other steps are, which may be a little bit bigger, but learn what are the local groups in your area that are doing stuff, like nonprofits and such, and see if there's stuff that you can get involved with. I remember actually like talking to a colleague because we were having a little moan, or like, what do you call it? Pity party about how nothing was happening in climate change. And she said, I just need to find a group that I can get involved with, because it helped her translate that energy that she was feeling of like, why is nothing happening, to at least, well, I'm going to get involved, right? And so it's a good idea. There's plenty, right? There's plenty in New Zealand of organizations doing this kind of stuff. Oh, and then the last one would be like, ask your church leaders what you're doing about your carbon footprint, right? Do you measure it? Do you know what it is? Do you have plans to reduce it? Do you have a plan to be carbon neutral, or even less than carbon neutral, right? Like, is there anything happening in that space?
You mean even speaking about it in church?
Yeah, well, that'll be a great one too, right? A sermon on it.
And there's specific organizations that are wanting to work with churches as well, right? Like there's Arosha, which is, they've got an eco church program, so it literally they coach you into the process of becoming an eco church. And
yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, so that's another way that people could just get in touch, flick them an email.
Yeah, I think it's like I was going to say chicken and egg, but it's not quite chicken and egg. It's like one of those like feedback loops where I think there needs to be buy-in from people in leadership in kind of Christian circles, but that leadership will also find it easier to have that buy-in if there's a groundswell of people that are wanting to get on board with this, right? And sometimes you kind of have to have one on the other starts, and it's hard to know which needs to go first here. But yeah, I think it is generalizing, but I think it's true that people of my age and younger are wanting to know what's happening here, right? And like, and if your concern is about things that are more, like I said before, who marries who or something like that, and there's nothing mentioned in this space, I think that's a big red flag for younger people. Like, I mean, not in a Christian setting, but I had a colleague, a young guy, at a guess he's like 22 maybe, ask our CEO in front of the whole company, like, what's our plan to get to carbon zero? And the answer wasn't great. But I talked to him afterwards, and he was like, yeah, that was thoroughly depressing, right? And he's now trying to figure out what that means for him. But people want to know, right?
Yeah.
What are we doing in this space? And if a church can't answer that, then that worries me.
I just want to thank you for, I suppose, just how you've opened up this conversation, how you've informed us, and the perspective that you're giving us, and the challenge. And we just want to thank you for taking time to share your heart and your journey and passion.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for hearing me talk.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Changes Ahead podcast.
If that resonated with you, we'd love to hear from you.
So get in touch on Instagram and Facebook @ChangesAheadCast or Twitter @AheadChanges. See you next time.